I'm so excited that we have Innovate Digital Solutions as a sponsor of heCast this season. Innovate Digital Solutions provides anything that an office might need. Hardware, software, IT, copy machines, things like that. They make an office run more smooth. And they're really good at it. But one of the things that I love about Innovate, their founders, Andre and Katia Brasso, they're people that don't just believe it's important to build a strong business, but also to take that success and build the strong community around them. They really have a heart for what He Changed It is doing. People they love have gone through some of the stuff that we talk about on this show. Andre and Katia both believe that you can build a life worth living, and there are these evidence-based solutions that can help build that life. We're so excited to be in partnership with Innovate Digital Solutions, and He Changed It is better for it, and we hope you will be too. Go to innovate.ca and check them out.
Welcome to heCast, the official podcast of He Changed It. As always, I am Mike Chisholm. As always, I am excited to come here and have these conversations. Not always the easiest conversations in the world, but always fulfilling. These conversations surrounding mental wellness, men's mental wellness in the men's space, whatever you want to refer to it as. If you haven't downloaded the He Changed It app, what are you waiting for? Go to hechangedit.com and you can find all of the information on what it is that we do and the links to the apps for your appropriate technological preference. Now, today, I always love when we have law enforcement or former law enforcement on. Having police, who are brave enough to talk about the toils of the job of mental, that go on for people in their mental health, being in law enforcement. And it is massive. It is massive. The job has changed over the years. It's evolved, and public opinion, all of the things that these people go through, and many times the stigma is deepest for them. They're the ones who don't admit weakness in things. Well, today we've got a guy by the name of Laverne Friesen, a police officer in various ways, the sheriff department, and also as a peace officer in Alberta, Canada, for a long time. And he talks about his story and where he came from and some of the things he went through and what caused it. And, really went into some dark places for a while. But the good news is he's on the other side of those dark places. And there are guys who may hear this that it may hit close to home. He talks about his anxiety. He talks about the feelings that he had of where his brain would not stop ruminating on these things, and it led him to some pretty dark places. And I appreciate Laverne and his courage. All of the vulnerability and transparency that he has in talking about what he has gone through, and how the victory on the other side that he is seeing and feeling, and because there is a way through, and he certainly does a good and compelling job of telling a story that a lot of people can relate to. So, without further ado, we are absolutely proud, honored to present our podcast today, our conversation with former law enforcement officer Laverne Friesen. Laverne, I am really excited to talk to you today, to have you on heCast. Anytime somebody can take, I'm a big believer in the idea that we can take struggle, things that we have gone through, whatever they are, be it, the far past stuff from the childhood all the way to stuff that happens to us in adulthood. When we can take some of this stuff and we can turn negatives into positives, that is something I think is extremely valuable. Sometimes even to the point of saying it was worth going through. So, because so much good comes out on the other end, so much learning and so much insight and motivation for others, inspiration for others, that kind of a thing. I've just kind of summed up what you've gone through in a nutshell there with that, haven't I?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
How long were you in law enforcement?
I spent about 15 years. I took a break for a couple of years. I started burning out, that's what I thought was happening. It was my body's capacity to handle any more stress was kind of filling up, so I took a break. But about 15 years.
And where did you serve?
I was throughout the province of Alberta.
Where you served?
I was in the province of Alberta.
And RCMP?
No,
Yeah.
I was with Alberta Sheriff Highway Patrol. So I spent
Yep.
7 years with the Alberta Sheriffs, and then I took a break, and I came back as a community peace officer here, which is basically traffic enforcement, but you don't get a gun, so it's a lot more scarier.
Yep.
And then I did that for
Yeah.
another several years. So
I love how you, I'm glad that you prefaced it saying it's a lot scarier, because even in the sheriff's department, you would have seen some stuff, but you're able to kind of defend yourself and protect yourself. As a peace officer, you have an idea as to what's out there. And at the end of the day, it's like an arm gets tied behind your back. Did you have any situations where that came into play, where that fear was realized?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, lots. So when I was in the sheriff's, I always consciously knew that if, I guess, can I swear on here? Please say yes.
Sure.
I always knew that if shit went sideways, I could shoot my way out of it. Right. As a peace officer, yep. Basically at the end of the day. Right. And so, yep. And then not only that, like a lot of times as a peace officer, you're working for a rural municipality and you don't have backup. And in the last 3 years of my career, I got rammed. I almost got ran over standing on the side of the road. I got in a couple fights by myself. One time, I think backup took 30 minutes to get there. Thankfully, my fitness saved me that day. And then, there's other times you might go to a collision, it might be a bad collision or a fatal or something, and you might be there for 20 minutes, and there's fear because you can't help people. There's fear because you're not doing enough, or, you're looking at a dead body and hanging out, right? So there's a lot of trauma associated with the job that people don't really think of necessarily, but
yeah. It's funny how that job has changed over our lifetimes. You think about what a police officer used to do. Just even like in the roles of administration, never mind all the other stuff that comes with it. They're talking about how they want law enforcement to be counselors now and things as they go out. And it's a job that requires so many hats that I don't know that it's possible to be effective, to have somebody who's an all-around effective force in doing this. You were a part of this, for lack of a better term, this industry, while all of this transition was happening. And yet you still came from a time where the stigma was, prevalent. The stigma is still there, but at least now it's part of the conversation. We're talking about PTSD. We've had law enforcement who have gone through the PTSD and first responders and whatnot. We've had them on the show. As you went through that, was it difficult negotiating your way through? Like when you took the break, was it because, what facilitated you needing to take the break?
Well, when I actually took the break, that was even before my mental health went bad, or declined, I should say. I was trying to get a transfer. I was working in a small town. I'd been in a small town for 5 years, and I couldn't get a transfer out of there to save my life. And it was hard because, people would see me driving around in my personal vehicle and recognize me and put their seatbelt on because they knew what I did. And when you're just always under this microscope. So I wanted out, and I couldn't get a transfer to save my life. And so an old acquaintance had phoned me and said, "Hey, I got this amazing offer in the oil field to make lots of money." And I said, "Yes," on the phone. And he said, "Well, don't you need to think about it for a while?" And I'm like, "No, I'm good." And so that's kind of what facilitated that. And then 2 years later, my now ex-wife and I were expecting our second child, and I'd promised her that I would be home every night. And so that's when I left the oil field to come back to law enforcement. I think your original question though was navigating the mental health crisis or whatever. And I can't honestly say necessarily that I navigated it because I was too scared to say anything. And so it all started with a traffic stop where I dealt with probably the most irrational person that I've ever dealt with in my life. And to exacerbate the issue, he took pictures of me, posted it on social media, and filled the comments with veiled threats towards me. But the worst part about that all was I knew where he lived, and he lived just around the corner from me. And so I was pretty scared. I had 2 young kids at home. I was always out walking, doing stuff with them. And I was really scared. I put up cameras around the house. And a week later, I saw him again. And I was in uniform, on duty. And he didn't even see me. And I had my first ever anxiety attack. And so I was in the office after it all happened. I realized what was going on. And I lost, for lack of a better term, I lost my shit. And I was yelling. I was very angry. And I felt let down by my department because they weren't doing more. And I'm like, get a lawyer, tell this guy to, cease and desist, whatever. But what I didn't realize then was an old childhood abandonment wound was starting to surface. And so that kind of triggered that. And then within a couple of weeks of that, I was put in a role where I was having the most fun that I'd ever had at work. And then about 2 or 3 weeks into that, I was pulled out of that role and given a task that I felt was impossible. And to make matters worse, my management team told me, you are the only one here that can do this. And of course, I applied tons of pressure on myself. But then over the summer months, I felt abandoned by my management team. And it's that old abandonment wound coming back. And so I started getting irritable. Little things would kind of set me off. Then I started getting angry. And then by the end of that summer, I was having outbursts of rage where I would see an email and I would just see red. And I it was crazy. I would be it would affect me for 2 or 3 days. So my then ex-wife convinced me to take a leave from work on stress leave, which in itself was a huge step for me because I believed that just taking that leave would affect my life or would affect my career.
Yep.
And so,
yeah. So there was fear attached to that, hesitancy, weakness, all of the things that stereotypically you'd think of. Was your actual reality at that point?
Oh yeah, I was living it. I was terrified.
Yep.
And I had been always considered a leader. I'd been told I was a leader. I'd been put in for a leadership award. So I think it was that much stronger for me. So I took 3 weeks off. The whole process in itself was flawed. The doctor let me down. The department let me down. There should have been many more steps that were taken as soon as I said I need time away for stress. The doctor asked me, how much time do you need? And I said, I don't know. You're the expert here.
Yeah.
And,
you tell me.
Right. And just to kind of skip a part here, 5 years later, I went on stress leave again. And she said, it's a mandatory, I'm taking you off for a minimum of 3 months. And there's the difference, right? So anyway, I picked a date.
Okay, so you actually watched this infrastructure. Sorry to interrupt, Laverne, but you actually, in your time in law enforcement, you actually saw progress being made in the value of what goes on with these members and what's going on in here, rather than just the body stuff. You actually seen progress be made in that industry regarding this place. I think it's important to note that. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that gives them a little bit of optimism.
Yes, and each agency is different. They have their own culture, but there is progress, and that's important to acknowledge. So I came back 3 weeks later, And the first thing I did was yell at my supervisor. And that should have been a red flag for everybody, including myself, because I have never been insubordinate in my life, right? So I came back to work. I was just like, man, whatever, it didn't do much. Like the stress leave really didn't do anything. And then several months later, my shift supervisor left. And so the department told me, well, we're not going to fill that spot, but you're the de facto leader. And I'm like, okay, now I got to prove my point, right? Like now I got to prove how good I am. And so I promptly set out to prove how good I was and how great of a leader I was and motivator and all this stuff. And about a month later, I crashed. Energetically, at least. Like I had no energy left. I was apathetic. I would spend my shift driving around drinking coffee. And so right there's a red flag. Like all of a sudden I'm not doing any work anymore. Nobody's right. And then that's when I started slipping into a depression. And I had no idea what was happening. I just knew that my world was closing in around me. And my world got bleaker and bleaker and bleaker. I couldn't sleep before work. So I started taking up to 5 times the recommended dose for a sleep aid. And the maximum I could get out of that was 2 hours of sleep at 5 times the dose. So I would either fall asleep and then wake up about 2 hours later and spend the rest of the night awake, or I would like some point in the middle of the night, I would fall asleep for about 2 hours. And
okay, as you're awake, I gotta ask this. As you're awake, your mind is spinning and all it's doing is focusing on these things. The anxiety is just absolutely eating you away. You can't stop thinking about this stuff.
100%. That's all I'm doing is I'm just ruminating on how horrible my life has become and how horrible everything is. During that time, I stopped working out. I had, prior to the traffic stop it was March of 2017, I was in the best shape I'd ever been in my life. And I stopped working out. I would ruminate about how horrible my life was. And I guess the next progression was suicidal thoughts. And so they start coming in, they start slipping in. And then pretty soon that escalated to, I was planning my own demise. Every night that I couldn't sleep, I would plan my own demise. And I knew exactly how it would happen. And I walked myself through it many times. But during that time, my then 3-year-old daughter, who had been sleeping in her bed every night, she would wake up and she would come snuggle in beside me, and she would tuck her little head right in my armpit, and she would lay right beside me, and I would feel her body, her warmth, and I would listen to her breathing. And I knew that I had to find a way to stay alive for her and her little brother. And I knew I had to, but I didn't know how. And I couldn't talk to anybody, or like I didn't think I could talk to anybody. I was terrified of how I'd be perceived, how I'd be perceived as weak and broken. And, in my career, I've worked with guys that were very active in peer support. And they always said, like, if you ever have any issues, contact anytime. I remember the one guy saying, I've been through the shit myself. Just anytime, message us. And the closest I ever came was typing a text message at 3 a.m. and then I deleted it because I was too scared. I was too scared of what would happen. And there's that, not only was there the stigma around mental health, but I was terrified of what would happen if I said, hey, I'm going to have some suicidal thoughts, because I had seen what happens many times. You call a distress center, you talk to them, you think you're anonymous. Next thing the door, you're getting a knock. Your next thing you know, you're getting a knock on your door from law enforcement and they're taking you to the hospital. Well, that's not what I wanted, right? Mm-hmm. I just wanted somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
So finally, when I was desperate to stay alive, I went to the one person in my life who I thought would help me and I thought would understand me. And I told them how bad it was. Mm-hmm. And the message wasn't received. And so I blamed myself for that. And so a few days later, I went back and I told that person, like, I really tried to tell them how bad it was. And they looked me in the eye and they said, I know. And then they walked out of the room. And I hope nobody else ever feels that alone or feels that despair. That's a horrible place to be. I didn't know how I was going to stay alive. I had no idea. I wanted to, though. I really wanted to. My children were, they were keeping me alive, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. And then I ran into a guy. So actually, kind of an interesting part of the story. Around that same time, I had somehow been approved to go on an instructor course in Colorado. And so I went to Colorado. It was a 6-day course as an instructor. And I should have been having the time of my life. It was an amazing course. But halfway through the course, I started dreading coming back to work. And I was just like, I can't do that. But I got back from the course and I ran into, a few days after I got back, I ran into an old acquaintance of mine who was actually a firefighter. And we ended up chatting for about 3 hours. And I don't know that he knew that I was going through a shitty time, but he talked to me. And just that connection, for the first time in about a year, I felt hope. I felt like, hey, maybe there's hope. And then shortly after that, agency close to where I lived had posted a position. So I applied for it. And I still don't understand how they hired me. But I think it just goes to show that we can hide our problems very well. Right. I think I was a high performing, anxious person or depressed person. So I got this new job or a new position, a different agency, and I thought everything would be better, but it wasn't. I was under a little bit more stress or less stress, but I still felt really off. And I want to mention something. So when I was going through my worst time, depressed, I was having outbursts in the office. There was one day my boss was there. There was 2 supervisors in the office. There was a bunch of other people in the office. And I just lost it. And I'm like, I can't take this anymore. This place is fucking ridiculous. And I can't, something along those lines. And how many people do you think reached out and said, hey, are you okay? Not one person. Yeah. Not one person. And I know there were good people there, but they were just too scared because they weren't equipped to handle what I might say. They're too scared. They didn't know what to say if I said, no, I'm not okay, right? So when I gave my notice and I quit that job, my boss approached me and he said, we've just kind of left you alone. And really, would he have said that at my funeral? Like, that's the worst thing you could have done is leave me alone, right? Because that whole time I was screaming inside for somebody to come talk to me, somebody to understand. But the caveat to that is it had to be somebody that understood. It couldn't just be anybody. And that's why it's so important for me to be open and be that person that understands and let everybody know, because they can come to me if I don't see it with them.
Well, there's a theme here. Before we move on to the next part of the story, there's a few things that I just want to kind of react to here. Number one is the feeling of dread and anxiety, and there's a lot of guys out there, and then you married that to the idea of a high performer. And there's a lot of guys out there who are high performers where they are. They do what they do well. And because, we wrap up identity, we wrap up either ego or our sense of accomplishment, our sense of, what we do is who we are. And, and even if we're going through hell, we don't want to let anything drop in that area. But then you couple that with the idea of anxiety and the dread that brings. And it's a snake that just keeps eating its own tail, and it doesn't stop until we stop it, or something happens where it stops. Something tragic happens where it stops. And it feels like you had a couple of those moments of clarity, your daughter coming in. I mean, my heart is breaking thinking about you feeling that dread, that anxiety, having your daughter come and knowing the feeling. I've got a granddaughter, and she's my everything. She's my absolute everything. And as you say that, the emotions are welling up inside of me going, oh my goodness, but how grateful. Like, love can trump all. And that grateful that pure love was a through line to you getting the awareness that you needed. And the other thing about awareness, there's a lot of guys out there who aren't even aware that they're feeling these things. They're doing these outbursts. They have no idea. What strikes me interesting with your story is how you did have a level of awareness, but a lack of application. And there are guys out there too who are aware how they're feeling, but they don't know what the next steps are. And it feels like to me, Laverne, that you have and are in the process of carving a path in a virgin jungle to getting to the fresh water. We're going from the beach, we're trying to find the fresh water on that island, and you've got a machete and you're trying to create a road here. And hopefully that's what we're doing. Hopefully that's what we're doing. And he changed it, that we can create a pathway that turns into a highway where once guys feel this way and know they feel this way in this unprecedented, complex society, we can get on that highway and go to the destination of that fresh water so we can get better, and then we can help others get better. That's where I want to go to the next question, and then you can progress with your story as well. You see somebody in your office, you see somebody in a space, and they have their outburst, and you're the person that sees this. As you alluded to, there's a lot of fear with that. There's a lot of fear being the person who sees this, because as you said, we're not necessarily equipped to deal with that. We have inadequacy issues of our own. There's fear that's there. Like, we might fear the person who's outbursting. You talked to that irrational guy, that irrational traffic stop, and that how that can put you into a tailspin when you deal with people like that. If you're a person that sees somebody going through something now, are you the guy that can easily say, you know what, I've been down this path before, and you can go to them and you can approach them? Because it takes a lot of bravery to do that as well.
100%. And it going through this whole process and then getting help and recovery and healing completely changed the way I worked in law enforcement. And I remember the first time I did it, I pulled a guy over for speeding late at night, and he had been going like, I can't remember the numbers, but it was excessive speed. And we're talking 40, 50, 60 kilometers over the speed limit. And while he's reaching around for his
fun to drive fast sometimes.
Yeah, especially at night when you don't think you're going to get caught.
It is. It's fun to. Or nobody's on the road. I'm going to take my vehicle out for a run, right? Like, it's fun to do that sometimes.
Yeah, and so while he was getting his documents for me, I sensed that something wasn't wrong, or something wasn't right. Something was wrong, and I stopped him for a second. I said, "Dude, forget that I'm in uniform. Man to man, are you okay?" And he wasn't okay. And he started bawling, man. And I sat on the side of the road with him and just held space for him for I have no idea. And I set him up with some resources, and he was a farmer. He wasn't sure if he was going to make the big, huge payments, and he was hurting. And that was the first time I did that. And it happened many times after that. And I never regret anything from my past, because, you always operate with the level of awareness you have at that moment. So you can't regret what you did in the past. Mm-hmm. But I started thinking back to so many encounters I'd had with people. And I'm like, oh man, they just wanted somebody to hold space for them. They didn't want to get a ticket, right? They didn't even need a speeding ticket or even a warning. They just wanted me to hold, I should have held space. And, I don't regret that, but man, I sure changed the way I did it. And, that's that's how we have to be. That's all you have to do. You see somebody at work that's not, not okay. You don't have to go fix them. You don't have to know what to say. You just have to hold a little bit of space for them. That might be all they need, right? Because you don't know. You don't know. They could be that guy trying to, fall asleep at night planning his own demise. You don't know, right?
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing I learned from all this, is that we all experience something. We all go through something. So why are we stigmatizing it? Because we all experience it.
Yeah.
Like,
we pretend that we're not, and we put on this veneer. We don't want to look weak, and unfortunately, I can certainly see why you're not in law enforcement anymore, because the people that I've talked to, and I understand how organizations, and it's not just law enforcement. You think people work for big corporations, and you got to toe the company line, and you got to live up to the expectations that are laid out. If you want a job that's in this ever-changing, more complex society, if you want to have a job or a career where you can feed your family, you've got to submit to the system that you are working for. And sometimes that becomes an impossible thing. Like you going and holding space for folks, if everything operating at its optimal, that is exactly how law enforcement should be. You can go in and you can de-escalate something. You can go and you can be, for lack of a better term, exactly what you said, a peace officer. You can literally go out there and try and keep the peace. Yet at the same time, you've got these targets, or some people have in their business quotas, expectations, whatever those are. And I can certainly see how, as you're finding this sort of enlightened moment, this path out of the darkness into the light, that could potentially not be parallel to what the goals are in that organization. Is that the case with you? Is that what happened? Because don't get me wrong. Any cop I ever see, that's the cop I want to see. I want to see the guy who's willing to hold space and understand, and having ears that listen with a heart involved. Oh my goodness, that's the most amazing thing. Not necessarily what the organization demands of its members. Is that safe to say?
100%. 100%.
Okay.
I actually got chided for that. That incident I got chided for, and they said, "You're not a counselor." And I'm like, I wasn't a counselor. I was just being a human. And wow, that's not your job. And it's so tone deaf, right? But maybe thankfully they've never experienced it and don't understand. But so I pretty soon morphed into this person, or this officer, that would just rather talk to people and hear their story and have a good chat and maybe share some of my own story. And if you're in a traffic enforcement role, that's not where you're supposed to, like, that's not what the organization wants. They want some numbers. They want, tickets or warnings or whatever it might be. And I was just having the time of my life helping somebody change a tire on the side of the road or whatever. Right. And so, I became, I became misaligned pretty quickly. And I realized that, and my organization didn't appreciate who I was becoming.
Wow. Now, at this point here, is that scary for you, or because you have learned the things that you've learned? Because I'm thinking back to the guy who the job was everything. You had your identity in that, and if you would have added the organization saying to you, "Oh my goodness, you're not who we want you to be, and you're not achieving, you're not performing," that would have just added to the pile. There's a lot of guys who start short-circuiting if they hear that. But at this point here, you've learned what you've learned. And were you okay with the idea that a transition might be coming?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I knew I was misaligned. I knew I should probably be trying to do something else. But at that point in my career, I'd been around for quite a while, a senior. I was making really good money, and I didn't know I was trapped, right? I was trapped. And so I was trying to do other stuff, and I wasn't really sure. And, that's where the universe came in and kind of kicked me in the butt and forced me out, and through a psychological injury. And then that whole process has helped me transition. And there is some grief involved in losing that identity and in losing that career. Yep. But because I was so misaligned, I was starting to process that grief a long time ago. Right. And so when it all happened, I embraced it. So July 2022 is the last time I worked in uniform, and I don't really miss it. I don't really miss it. I was that wasn't my purpose. I do believe kind of in a higher purpose, and I believe that I was in law enforcement for a time to learn some lessons, and then once I achieved those lessons, it was time for me to move on. When I do look back and remember the good times, it's mostly the good people I worked with, and the times that I could help people in maybe not a law enforcement sense, and maybe just being a good human with them, right? So.
Yeah, and it's again, we talk about this misalignment and the person that you're becoming, and how that's not necessarily how we view what law enforcement is at this juncture. Hopefully, at a certain point, we can change that. We can make those two ideas kind of one, or at least closer to each other than they are now. Are you okay talking about the psychological injury that happened to you, that the straw that broke the camel's back? The thing that finally got you the freedom that you wanted, but through a tunnel of stuff that's not so nice. What happened?
Well, yeah, I'll talk about it. It wasn't really. I don't know what it was, and I honestly, I think it's my childhood. That abandonment wound, and then. I started realizing how toxic law enforcement can be, or the management, the organizations. And that's not a good place for somebody like me, because I have a moral compass. It's very strong, and I will stand up against anything I don't think is right. And I have lost a lot of so-called friends over the years by standing up for what I believe is right. And so I was in around 2022, the stress was kind of adding up. Like early 2022, I'd been to a couple fatals. I had COVID was very hard on law enforcement. It was the whole George Floyd thing. It was very hard. So the George Floyd death was tragic. In saying that, everybody tried to piggyback off that, and for nefarious or other reasons. And so there was a lot of frivolous complaints that started coming in, and those are stressful. Whether even if they're frivolous, you still have to be investigated. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of the COVID stuff. There was a lot of polarization during COVID. And of course, we're stuck in the middle saying, hey, you got to be closed or whatever. And so that time was stressful. I had gone through a divorce, which is stressful. I had had to learn how to be a single parent. And that's stressful in its own right. And then I had gone through an extreme period of growth during that time. So, there was a lot of stress there.
Yep.
I had been...
because growing ain't easy necessarily. That's a good... Thank you for saying that. Because growth is like my 6-year-old granddaughter, the poor thing, sometimes she sleeps over at our house once a week, and the poor little thing gets growing pains. And I mean, her legs are growing up, and she's a little athlete and all that. But when you're literally growing fast, it's stretching. And it's uncomfortable, and it can be extremely painful. And the same thing happens when we're trying to grow our inside of our head, and turn from one thing into another, and transition from one thing to another. Metamorphosis, that's painful, and it's worth it. And I love that you can say on the other side that it's worth it, and you can give a whole list of reasons why it's worth it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy. It might be simple even. You might even simply know what the answer is. The answer could be laid out perfectly for you, logically, with a simple set of steps. But simple does not necessarily mean easy.
No, and I have actually found in my own personal growth, it's always simple. It's just not easy. Mm-hmm. Right? And we think it's so hard or so difficult. It's simple, but so there had been a lot of stress going on. And then in the winter, one of my friends and coworkers had filed a bullying and harassment complaint against the supervisor. And I got asked if I would be a witness. And I said, yeah, absolutely, I'll be a witness. I personally felt that it was a founded complaint. And they brought in a third-party investigator, and I don't have a lot of faith in these things. I'd been through this before. Mm-hmm. And while I was being investigated, or while I was providing my statement, it was bringing up a lot of emotions from my previous position and some things that had happened there. And I was kind of being triggered or having my emotions activated. But like I said, I don't hold back when I feel I'm doing the right thing. And I knew after that it was only a matter of time. And so, I started having this mental health decline. And I don't really know what started it, like if there's one specific thing. But the thing for me that always shows up, the first symptom of declining mental health for me is a little bit of anxiety. But when I know that things have kind of gone off the rails is when I get hypervigilant. And there was a day I was in my house.
Interesting.
And so, but to kind of clarify that, like I used to be hypervigilant. That was my normal, was what most people would call hypervigilant. And most first responders, but most people in law enforcement are at a level of hypervigilance. When I talk hypervigilance, I'm going we're talking like paranoia level. And I was at home one day and I knew logically 100% that I was the only person in my house. And the wind brushed against the window or whatever, there was some noise. And I was creeping through my house with a big kitchen knife in my hand, trying to figure out where the intruder was, even though I knew I was alone.
Wow.
So my mental health was starting to come off. And then in July 2022, I received a performance review, and I had always been top level performer. They had expressed how I was always the golden boy, whatever. And they had lowered my rating. And the only reason they'd lowered my rating was because I had taken sick time. And they'd marked my sick time down. And it was all the times that I had taken off for mandatory COVID isolation. And as a single dad, I think there was 3 times when I had my kids where they were in isolation too. And so I literally just I can't fucking do this anymore. And it wasn't about the job. It was about the BS that comes with the office politics. And those politics and those tactics aren't just isolated to law enforcement and first responders. It could be any office building anywhere. And so I went to the doctor, and she said, you need 3 months off work. And I went to my psychologist, who I'd known since 2019 when I first got help. And she looked at me and she said, I think it's time you started thinking about a different job. And so that's how it happened.
What a godsend. Man. Sometimes somebody saying that to you and providing that moment of clarity or that statement out loud, it provides a lot of freedom, doesn't it?
Yeah, and actually, it's fun. It's funny because a little bit before that, so the day that I got my performance review, I'm like, I can't deal with this, and so I called a friend of mine from a peer support group that I facilitate. He's a retired police officer. He was medically retired for PTSD. So we went for coffee, and I explained everything. I explained everything to him, and he leans across the table. He looks at me, and he's like, "Dude, admit it. You're done." Mm-hmm. And I'm like, yeah, I think I am. And so that afternoon, when I returned to the office, I was driving back to the office. I'm like, this is the last time. This is the last time I'm in this uniform. This is the last time I'm driving a patrol vehicle. This is it. And so I got back to the office, and I gathered all my personal belongings that I wanted to keep because I didn't know when I was coming back. And I never walked back in that office again. And it was a godsend because I had a psychologist that understood. And thankfully, after some unnecessary bureaucracy stress from the Workmen's Compensation Board, they accepted my complaint or my claim, and they are topping up my salary. So I'm not really losing out. And that was the push from the universe saying, okay, like, it's time for you to move on. And
it's going to be okay.
Yeah. We're going to take care of you, or yeah, you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And, man, I don't know the guy from 2 years ago that went off work. I don't know the guy that from 6 months ago. Like, I've changed so much since that time, and it's been an amazing experience, a great journey.
So for guys, let's look at some application here, because I just appreciate how willing you are to tell your story, your vulnerability. I appreciate that so much, especially considering your background. And there's more. And the next time you come on, I hope to have you on again, Laverne. I really do. And we can talk about some of the other things that you've, because there's background stuff, talk about organizations and whatnot, and your childhood and all of these things too. We haven't even gotten, like, we've scratched the surface of your vulnerability here, and we can get into that another time. But I want to get to application because there's a lot of guys out there, to coin that phrase, to say that well coined phrase, living quiet lives of desperation. There's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of guys who are, all their plates are spinning and they're trying to be a provider, but they feel bad inside. They feel like a piece of shit because of how they're treated at home or how they're treated at work or how they're treated from people. They're not living in harmony with who they are. They're not even aware necessarily. There's guys who are in this place right now where everything's just spinning. And we want to be able to help them and apply some things to that. Self-love is one. We talked about that before we hit record. And I want to make sure we get to that before we finish off. But let's talk about some application. Guys who hear what you're saying, they identify with one or more parts of what you've gone through. What are some things that you would throw out there to guys who are in the mess right now?
Oh man, there's so much. First thing, the first thing is you are not alone. Your struggle, you are not special in this, right? And I thought I was special in my struggle. I thought that no one will understand, and you have no idea how many people will understand you and know what you're going through. And when you're in that place, you don't trust anyone. But there are peer support groups, there are men's groups, there are so many groups, and reach out to someone. Unfortunately for me, when I reached out, it didn't work. Let's talk about the positive here.
Well, hold on though, because at the end of the day, hold on, before we get to that, yeah, we are going to talk about the positive, but part of it is you reached out to maybe the wrong person, but that didn't stop you from ending up reaching out again, if you could look back and okay, hindsight being 2020, you reached out to the wrong person. If you could have found the right person at that time, you could have been back on track earlier. But even recognizing the fact that you reached out to the wrong person who wouldn't hold space for you, that brings you wisdom for the future moving forward, that you want to make sure that the person that you reach out to is a safe space, is someone who is willing to hold space for you. And if they're not, you find somebody who is. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Okay. And so people that might not be aware that they're struggling, a lot of times based on our childhoods, we surround ourselves with those emotionally unavailable people. But at our subconscious, we know who the people are.
Yeah.
And that guy, I almost sent a text message to at 3 o'clock in the morning. That guy would have helped me. I guarantee it. Yeah. And that guy would have helped me. And so trust your instinct, trust your intuition in who you're reaching out to, and don't give up. And I want to share a story about not giving up part. A couple months ago, my daughter, who's now 9, woke up from a nightmare, and she wanted cuddles with her dad. And as I cuddled into bed with her, I thought about all those nights years ago where she had comforted me, and now I was comforting her, and I was filled with so much gratitude and so much love at being able to be there for her, to the honor to be present and be here for my daughter, and so grateful that I had fought through. And I have never once regretted ever fighting through. There is a way, there's always a way. And you can, no matter how bleak and dark it is, there's a way. And sometimes you have to find it on your own, and sometimes somebody will help you. But there is a way, and I guarantee it. In 19 years of public service, I worked with 5 guys that died from suicide. And they were all high performers until they weren't. And there's a way. I'm telling you, there's a way. And I'm living proof. And I took the long route. I took 2 years until I risked public embarrassment when I couldn't function at a call to get help. But there is a way. You don't have to wait 2 years. Like, just go talk to somebody, find somebody in your corner. And you oftentimes it's somebody that we don't know very well that will help us more than the people we've known for years. And just remember that if you're listening, remember that. Absolutely. It might be a guy that you just met that seems really nice, and talk to them, because they might be that angel.
I could not agree with that statement more. I have experienced that statement. My wife and I wrote a book a few years ago, and I devoted half of a chapter to that concept alone. It's funny when you go through something. It's so interesting to see how sometimes the people that you would think, for me, it was like business partners and people who I'd been doing things with for years. And it was fine while I was performing. But the moment that I needed something, the moment that I wasn't performing and I needed something, they were gone. But some folks in the background, people who I would even consider acquaintances, suddenly rose up. And they were the support structure that I had. And in the book that we wrote, I wrote it like about a half a chapter about that exact concept. I think that is a very powerful thing. And that's where the awareness comes in, because if we got our blinders on, it's a racehorse term, right? You got your blinders on, they're there so you don't see what's going on the side. You just look at what's going on forward. If we have our blinders on when we're going through stuff, and many times we do, we don't necessarily have the creative thought to say who's in the background that might be there seeing us and feeling us and already trying to help, but we don't even see it. So sometimes that help comes from unlikely places. It may come from a podcast. It may come from a conversation like what we're having right now. It may come from an article, something that comes across your feed. There's all sorts of ways. We just need to be seekers and to look for that. I really appreciate you saying that. One of the things that we talked about too, Laverne, is self-love. And we started this conversation, and I mean, where we started it, the producer Joel was on and all that, and we were about to start, and I asked one little question, and you went down this path of self-love that's like, oh my God, the record light's not even on. I want to try and recapture that. You've learned about self-love over the past couple months. Like it's like this journey that you've been on. It's not over. It's a continual thing, and you're still discovering these things. Talk a little bit about your discovery of self-love.
So I'm going to go back a little bit further. In 2020,
Please do.
I got divorced, and as much as it hurt, the weeks I didn't have my kids, I started making sure I was doing stuff for me. And there was one day in the gym, I had this epiphany. I was like, man, I think I love myself. Right? Because I'm doing this stuff for myself that is good for me. I went through a few more hard lessons before now. But a couple years ago, I met this lady that showed me what true unconditional love was. And I had never experienced that before. And in January of this year, she ended the relationship. And I was heartbroken. I like to say I was like, she's an amazing person, and I was heartbroken. But right after she left my house, I wrote in my journal that I'm going to do this the right way, and I'm going to feel the pain, and I'm going to embrace it and let it flow through me. And that's where I started. A couple of days later, I talked to a mentor of mine, and she told me to honor myself. And she told me that in a very specific situational sense. But I had never been told to honor myself before. And so I started doing things and asking myself all the time, does this honor me? And there was a lot of times I said no. And that's when I started realizing all the habits that I'd created over my lifetime that I thought were part of me, but they were just these habits that I developed. They weren't part of me. And with that concept, I started doing everything that I knew I should have been doing. So since I started seeing a psychologist in 2019, I learned all these tools that I should be doing that I wasn't doing. Or I would do, say like 3 out of 5 for 6 months. Oh, I'm doing good. And then it would trail off. And then I would get anxiety again or something.
Yep.
And so I started doing all the stuff that I knew I should do. And what I didn't realize at the time was that in honoring myself, I was teaching my inner child and my subconscious that I was worthy of love. And by doing it and consistently, I was proving to myself that I was worthy of love. And then I realized I was actually loving myself. And I'd heard on another podcast that if you look in the mirror and make eye contact with yourself, and you don't feel the same love that you would for your child or your spouse or whoever you love dearly, then you don't actually love yourself. And so I had tried that, and I'm like, oh, I don't think it's quite there. But after a couple of months of doing this, I discovered that I love myself. When I look at myself in the mirror, I get a sparkle in my eye. And I'm like, dude, I love you. And I know that I'm not lying because I can feel it. And so, yeah, I've taught myself, now for the first time in my life, I know that I love myself. I trust myself and I'm honoring myself. And one of the big things, probably the biggest thing that happened to me was I stopped emotional eating. And I don't know if that's the process of loving myself or the process of healing my inner child. Because when you go through heartbreak, your inner child starts crying for attention. And once you can realize that's who it is or what it is, man, I've cried so much into my journal, but I've released so much of that pain that I didn't know was there. So I started losing weight, and I wasn't trying to lose weight. But I have treats that I send with my kids to school, and I would always look at them and I'll just grab some of those sugary treats or whatever. Now I look at them and there's no interest
2
whatsoever.
for them, 1 for me.
Yeah. Right. there's no interest. And so my life has changed completely just by like loving myself and showing myself that I was worthy of it, though, because at a subconscious level, I didn't think I was.
I don't think we put enough weight or emphasis on how powerful epiphanies can be, and how when we discover something, a new truth, a new light, something is opened up to us. How you bring up the idea of childlike. It's wondrous. It's wondrous when we can actually get these insights about ourselves, and the empowerment that can springboard from that, and the opportunities that can come from that empowerment. Just because we look at the world differently, and we look and see doors that we didn't even realize were there that we could walk through if we want to, because of these things. It is a wondrous, joyful thing, and I'm feeling the joy through the ones and zeros as we're communicating here. What are you doing now? And I mean, we shared a joke earlier too. I have a pastor friend of mine, and he's one of these pastors that he's a cool pastor. I can say anything. I can swear in front of this guy. There's no judgment whatsoever. But that's just who he is and what he does. And one thing he told me, he goes, a lot of the really, really effective pastors in the world were brought into it kicking and screaming. They did not want to. They were yanked into it. They were pulled into it. And I know that there are people who are counselors and life coaches and things like that feel the same way. And I want you to maybe talk a little bit about that, because you clearly are on a journey, and I want to know where the journey is taking you and what you're doing right now. And I want to talk about your course. So
for sure. So starting 3 years ago, my psychologist told me I should be a life coach. And I'm like, no, like there's a million, not really my vibe. Right. But yeah. After I changed my life so drastically, and like, I feel joy over like little things, right? Like, and big things happen in my life that would be stressful. I'm like, whatever, right? Like, not a big deal, right? Like, and so when I saw that change within myself, I'm like, well, I probably have to share this. Mm-hmm. So I wrote a course, or developed a 12-week course, and I called it Transformation Through Honor. And I'm like, I'll just sell it online. I'll just figure out like whatever, some passive income. And the more I started thinking about it, I'm like, no, like that's my energy. I have to be able to share my energy with people and express like, this is what I did, whatever. And so I just kind of worked into, or fell into that, life coach, personal coach kind of role. And I started coaching, and I told you earlier, yesterday or the day before, I got an email from a guy, and he's like, man, I just started this course and you've already changed my life. And I don't want to take credit for that, because really he has to do the work, right? He has to do the work, but I think I might have shown him which way to go. Right. And I think you can tell from like, I nerd out on this stuff, like talking about healing and journeys. Like I'm not a fun guy to have at a party, because, I walk up and like, so how's your healing journey going? Right. Like, yeah. Yep. Don't invite that dude. Right. Like, he's going to make you uncomfortable. But I don't really want to talk about, I don't know, what the weather's like, right? Like, let's just get to the nuts and bolts here, right? But yeah, so
you're the guy who when be careful saying how are you to you. Yeah, because you're the guy who doesn't just take how are you as a greeting. You're the guy who's going to say, no, you take it seriously. And but the cool thing is, when you ask it, you're also the guy who, when you ask it, you mean it. And when I have those people in my life, the people who, when they say, how are you, they truly want to know how Mike's doing today. They truly care. They want to know if I'm okay. Hey, brother, you're all right. And it's okay if you're not. And I'm asking you that. That's what I mean when I say, how are you? Yeah. You're that guy. And I appreciate that very, very much. To talk about where do you get the course? Transformation Through Honor. That's amazing. It's an amazing title of it. Where do you find it?
It's on www.trueemotion.ca. or if people want to chat about it first, probably the easiest way is I'm old. At least that's what my kids tell me. So the easiest way is Facebook, maybe Instagram.
I'm that guy too. I'm that guy. Yeah. Yep. I'm
Yeah.
Facebook too.
Yeah. Laverne Friesen on Facebook. It's so what I did when I designed it was I went back to who I was before that fateful traffic stop in 2017.
Yeah.
And I said, what would that guy have needed to know to become the guy I am today? And so that's 7 years ago. And I started out slowly because you have to introduce people. You can't just like throw a big textbook at them or whatever and like, here you go. Mm-hmm. And so you build up habits to make sure that you can withstand the storm. And then you start reflecting, building some self-awareness, who you are, who the people behind you or around you are. And well, it's a life changer because I changed my life. I'm a slow learner though. I had to go through some big things and repeat some lessons a few times, and there's no need for that, right? So
yeah. I appreciate you very, very much. We need more people like you in the world who are, the big, strong alpha male and have proved it, but at the same time know what really makes life work, what really makes us tick, what's really important, and the vulnerability that you show shows more strength than any of the previous things that I just said shows. And it truly, truly does. It's one thing to kind of know that or hear it as a platitude. It's another to experience it and realize, oh, wait a second. I don't care how good I could wrestle someone to the ground if I had to. I don't care how effective I am in the gym at my strengths and all that. This is way stronger. And to actually know that and to live it, Laverne, you are that guy. TrueEmotions.ca. I'm gonna close out here, not because I want to, only because we're at that place. I appreciate the support you have for He Changed It and what we're doing. We're trying to create an organization that literally encompasses everything that you're talking about here. The motto is one of the mottos that we have. That Candy and her team have as they're building this thing. I just host a podcast, but as they're building this thing, one of the things that they have is, take something that you need and leave something that you know. And you are the epitome of that. You're living that right now, and you're leaving a lot of the things that you know to help other people pick up, because there is such a need out there. So Laverne, thank you so much for taking time to come on to heCast today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the space that you have here on this podcast.
Oh man, it's the pleasure is all ours. That's why we do the show, everybody. Guys coming on here and telling their stories from their corner of their viewpoint or perspective of how they have grown up, and what they've gone through. Iron sharpens iron, and that's what we want to be. We want to be a piece of iron that can help you or help someone that you know. If you know anybody that needs to see this stuff, please forward this on. Go to hechangedit.com. You can see all the stuff that's happening. There's a lot of stuff happening in the background right now. Things are about to get pretty exciting for He Changed It. The app is available, of course, and we're just so grateful for the support that we've received over these number of years as we've gotten to the point that we have, and we're really excited to put the pedal down and go further. That has been another episode of heCast, the official podcast of He Changed It. My name is Mike Chisholm. Go change something.